Abigail Carter did not cry. She folded her wedding dress with both hands, set it across the chair like it belonged to someone else, and placed the ring on his pillow. Not with anger, not with grief, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who finally understood her own worth. She had heard him on the balcony, every word. And now she was leaving. If this story moves you, subscribe and follow Abigail's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1814 came in heavy and still over Harrowfield, Virginia. The kind of summer that pressed down on everything on the tobacco fields, stretching south of the Brooks estate on the river that ran copper-brown at the edge of the property, on the women who moved through the big house in careful silence, doing what was expected of them without being asked twice. Abigail Carter had spent 6 years learning that silence. She was 26 years old, the daughter of a country physician who had died 2 winters past and left her a leather satchel full of medical notes, a small house with a leaking roof, and a reputation for being too serious to be properly charming. She knew how to set a bone, compound a tincture, and talk a frightened child through a fever. She did not know how to laugh at the right moments at a dinner table, or how to let a man believe he was smarter than her. She supposed that was part of the reason Nathaniel Brooks had agreed to marry her, not for her beauty, though she was not without it. Dark hair, a steady gaze, hands that were capable rather than decorative. Not for her family name, which carried no weight in the parlors of Harrowfield, but because she was, as Margaret Brooks had once said to her son, within Abigail's earshot, sensible. A sensible woman would not interfere with business. A sensible woman would manage the household, raise the children, and understand her place in the arrangement without requiring explanation. Abigail had told herself she could live with that. She had been wrong. The night before her wedding, the house was restless. The Brooks estate had swollen with guests. Cousins from Richmond, business partners from Philadelphia, a minister who had arrived 2 days early and spent his time eating. The kitchens had been running since before dawn. Somewhere on the second floor, 2 of the housemaids were arguing in whispered hisses about the placement of the floral arrangements. Abigail had sat through dinner with a straight spine and a pleasant expression, and said all the correct things at all the correct intervals. And when the meal was finally done, she had excused herself quietly and gone upstairs. She needed air. The upper hallway ran the length of the east wing, and at its far end, a set of glass doors opened onto a narrow balcony that looked out over the back garden. Abigail had always liked that balcony. In the month since her engagement to Nathaniel, when she had stayed at Harrowfield at Margaret's formal invitation, she had taken to sitting there in the early mornings with a cup of tea and her father's botanical notes, doing the one thing in that house that felt entirely her own. She pushed the door open. She stopped. Nathaniel was already there. He stood with his back to her, one hand resting on the iron railing, the other loose at his side. He was still dressed from dinner, white shirt, dark coat, and he was not alone. Margaret Brooks stood beside him, her silver hair pinned with characteristic precision, her posture as composed as ever. Abigail did not step back. She did not step forward. She stood in the shadow of the doorframe and breathed. "Cannot keep postponing this conversation," Margaret was saying. Her voice was measured. It was always measured. "The ceremony is tomorrow morning. You will be expected to present yourself as a man who chose this." "I did choose it," Nathaniel said. "You chose it because it was reasonable. That is not the same thing." A pause. "I am asking you directly, Nathaniel. Do you feel something for this woman? Something that will last longer than obligation?" The silence that followed was not long. 3 seconds, perhaps 4. But Abigail counted each one. "I respect her," Nathaniel said. "She is—" He stopped. "She is capable. She is decent. She will make a good partner." "That is not what I asked." Another silence. "No," he said finally. His voice was quiet. Not cruel. That was the thing that would stay with Abigail longest afterward. The thing she would turn over in her mind during the long miles north. He did not sound cruel. He sounded tired. "No. I don't think I am capable of feeling what you are describing. Not for her. I don't believe I ever will." Margaret made a small sound, not quite satisfaction, not quite sorrow. "Then you understand what this is?" "Yes. A sound arrangement, no more no less. Yes. Abigail stepped back from the doorframe. She moved down the hallway without hurrying. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her breathing was controlled the way she had learned to control it at her father's side, sitting with patients who were frightened, keeping her own fear quiet so theirs could ease. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She waited for something to break open inside her, for the grief she assumed was standing just behind her sternum, waiting to arrive. It did not come. Not yet. What came instead was clarity. She had known on some level. She had always known. Not because Nathaniel was unkind to her, he wasn't. He was considerate in the way that good, responsible men are considerate, he asked. After her health, remembered details she mentioned in passing, pulled out her chair before she had to think about it. When they had walked together in the garden at Harrowfield, he had been easy company, thoughtful, even interesting when politics or business drew him into genuine enthusiasm. But he had never looked at her. Not really. Not the way a man looks at a woman when she has walked into a room and something in his chest has shifted before he had time to arrange his expression. Abigail had read about that look. She had seen it once on the face of a young farmer in her father's village, when his wife came through the door with mud on her boots and her hair unraveling from its pins, laughing at something she'd seen on the road. The farmer had not said a word. He hadn't needed to. Nathaniel had never looked at Abigail like that. She had told herself it was enough that he was good. She had told herself that warmth could grow over time, that respect was a foundation as solid as any other. She had believed those things because she had needed to believe them, because the alternative was understanding that she was about to give her life to a man for whom she was at best a practical solution to a problem she had not been part of creating. She understood it now. She sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet room and understood it completely. Then she stood up and went to the wardrobe. She did not pack everything. There was no point. She had no way to carry everything tonight, and more to the point, she did not want everything. She wanted what was hers. What had always been hers, before she had brought it into this house, under the assumption that it would become part of a life she was building here, her father's satchel. The leather was worn soft at the handle from 30 years of his grip before hers. She set it on the bed and began filling it with methodical care. The medical notes, 3 bound journals, a small tin of dried herbs she had prepared herself, a folded list of names, physicians, apothecaries, contacts. Her father had made over a lifetime of practice, people who might know of work, for a woman who knew what she knew and was willing to work harder than anyone expected. She had written to one of them. Weeks ago, on a quiet afternoon at Harrowfield, while Margaret held court in the parlor below, and Nathaniel rode out to inspect the south fields. A physician in Boston named Dr. Elias Farnsworth, a colleague of her father's, an old man who had sent a single letter in response. Your father spoke well of your capabilities. I am old and my hands are not steady. Come when you are ready. There will be work. She had folded that letter and kept it in the bottom of the satchel beneath the journals, as if she had known even then that she might need it. She found it now, read it once, put it back. Then she changed out of her evening dress and into her traveling clothes, a plain dark skirt, a cotton blouse, her sturdy boots. She moved without sound through the room. The house had quieted around her. The guests were settled, the servants finished for the night. Outside the window, the Virginia summer held its breath in the thick darkness before dawn. She lifted the wedding dress from where it lay across the back of the chair. She had made it herself in the front room of her father's house, in the months after the engagement had been settled. It was not elaborate. She had never been interested in elaborate, but it was careful. Every seam deliberate, every tuck considered. She folded it, corner to corner the way her mother had taught her. Set it across the chair with both hands, smoothing the fabric flat. Then she looked at the ring. It was a fine ring, a square-cut sapphire set in gold. Margaret had chosen it, which was appropriate given that the marriage had essentially been Margaret's design from the beginning. Abigail had worn it for 4 months. She had looked at it every morning and told herself it meant something it apparently did not. She slid it from her finger. She crossed to the bed. She set the ring on his pillow, on Nathaniel's side. The left side. The side he slept on, the side she had known was his, because she had paid attention to everything in this house, with the careful attention of a woman who understood that attention was her best tool. She did not leave a note. There was nothing she wanted to say that a note could carry without diminishing it. She picked up the satchel. She walked to the door. She turned back once, not from doubt, but from the instinct to remember. She had spent 4 months walking in and out of this room. She stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds and looked at the shape of it in the dark. Then she turned away and did not look back again. The main staircase was too exposed. She took the servants' stairs at the back of the east wing, narrow, uncarpeted, smelling of lye soap and old wood. She moved down them with one hand on the wall, not because she needed the support, but because the darkness was absolute, and she had learned long ago that caution was not the same thing as weakness. The kitchen was empty. A single lamp had been left burning low on the table. She crossed the room without touching it, lifted the latch on the back door, and stepped out into the summer night. The air was warm and close, dense with the smell of honeysuckle from the hedgerow at the garden's edge. A half-moon hung low in the sky, washing everything in a thin, pale light. Somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill was calling. Abigail stood on the back step and took one breath. Then she walked. The road north was not a road she had traveled often. She knew the shape of it, the long, flat stretch away from Harrowfield, the turn through the stand of sycamores at the 2-mile mark, the bridge over the river at Carver's Creek. She had a plan, though she would not have called it that the night she had first begun forming it. Plans required intention. What she had built over those quiet weeks at Harrowfield was more like a lifeline, something she had woven quietly in case she ever needed it, not quite believing she would. She needed it now. She walked for just under an hour before she heard the sound of a wagon. She had known there would be one. Old Thomas Greer ran a supply wagon from Harrowfield to the crossroads at Millhaven every third Tuesday before sunup, carrying goods to meet the northbound coach. She had asked him about it 3 weeks ago, standing outside the estate's back gate with her satchel in her hand, as if she were simply curious about the supply routes. Thomas Greer was 71 years old and had known her father and did not ask unnecessary questions. "Heading somewhere, Miss Carter," he said now, pulling his horse to a slow walk beside her. "Boston," she said. "Eventually. Millhaven first if you have room." He looked at her for a moment, at the satchel, at her traveling clothes, at the very deliberate absence of a trunk or a chaperone or any of the markers that would indicate this was a planned and approved departure. "Got room," he said. She climbed up beside him. They rode in silence for a while, the horse's slow footfalls marking the dark road. "Your father was a good man," Thomas said finally. "He was," Abigail agreed. "He'd be proud of you." She did not answer that. She pressed her hands flat against her knees and looked at the road ahead and let herself feel for the first time since she had walked away from the balcony exactly how much it hurt. Not because she had loved Nathaniel Brooks with the kind of love that rewrites a person, but because she had tried. She had brought her whole self to that house, her knowledge, her competence, her steady hands, and her careful attention, and it had not been enough to make him see her. And there was grief in that, clean and specific, the grief of effort that was not received. She let herself feel it. Then she folded it away, neatly the way she had folded the wedding dress, deliberately, with both hands. She had work to do. At the crossroads in Millhaven, she caught the morning coach north. The coachman was a wide-shouldered man who raised an eyebrow at a woman traveling alone before dawn with a leather satchel and no trunk. She looked at him until the eyebrow settled. She had learned that skill too, the steady, unhurried gaze of a woman who does not require permission to take up space. "Boston," she said. "What do I owe you?" She paid from the small leather purse she carried in the satchel. Her savings were not large. They were enough. She had made sure of that. There were 2 other passengers on the coach, a merchant from Fredericksburg, who fell asleep before they cleared the crossroads, and a young woman of perhaps 16, traveling with a wicker basket on her lap, who kept glancing sideways at Abigail with barely contained curiosity. "Are you running away?" the girl finally asked, somewhere around the 3rd mile. Abigail considered the question. "No," she said. "I'm running toward something." The girl seemed to weigh this. "That's a nicer way of saying it," she said finally. "It's also the true way," Abigail said. "There's a difference." The girl smiled at that uncertain but genuine and went back to watching the road. Back at Harrowfield, it was Delia who found the room empty. Delia had been housemaid at the Brooks estate for 11 years and had seen more domestic upheaval than she would ever discuss aloud. She was 43 years old, practical, and fond of Abigail Carter. In the specific way one becomes fond of a woman who treats servants like people without making a performance of it. She found the room at 5:30 in the morning when she came to bring the warm water for Miss Carter's morning wash. The door was unlocked. The wardrobe was open and partially cleared. The wedding dress was folded over the back of the chair with a precision that made Delia's chest ache. And there on the left pillow on the side, that would have been Mr. Brooks's side, the sapphire ring. Delia stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she set the water pitcher down on the side table very quietly and went to find Mr. Brooks. Nathaniel was already awake. He had not slept well. He had not expected to. The night before one's wedding was rarely restful, and he had something else pressing on him besides ordinary nerves. The conversation with his mother on the balcony had replayed itself in his mind with the insistence of an unresolved chord. He had told her the truth. He always told his mother the truth. That was not the part that troubled him. What troubled him was that he could not identify what exactly he had told the truth about. He did not know what he felt for Abigail Carter. That was the honest answer. He had tried in the months of the engagement to map what was between them into a shape he recognized. Respect, certainly. Appreciation for her intellect. A kind of relief that she did not require the emotional performance that other women of his acquaintance seemed to expect. He had told himself those things were sufficient. He had believed it, but lying in the dark at 5 in the morning, he found he wasn't certain what he believed anymore. He was standing at the window of his bedroom when he heard the knock. "Mr. Brooks." Delia's voice careful and flat. He opened the door. Her expression was the one she wore when delivering news she did not want to deliver. "What is it?" he said. "You'll want to come, sir," she said. "Miss Carter's room." He followed her down the hall in his shirt sleeves. The door to Abigail's room was open. He stepped inside. He registered the wardrobe first, then the wedding dress folded on the chair, then the stillness of the room, the particular stillness of a space from which something essential has been removed. Then the ring. He crossed the room in 4 steps and picked it up. It sat in the center of his palm, small, cold, heavier than it had any right to be. He stood there with it for a long moment. "When?" he said. "Before dawn, sir. I would say 4 in the morning, maybe 3:30. Did anyone see her leave?" "Not that I've spoken to." He turned the ring over in his hand. The sapphire caught the gray morning light. "She took her father's satchel," Delia said. She wasn't quite asking. She wasn't quite telling. She was doing what Delia did, which was speaking the pieces of a situation aloud until their meaning became clear. "Yes," Nathaniel said quietly. "She would have." He was still holding the ring when his mother appeared in the doorway. Margaret Brooks was already dressed, already composed, already carrying the particular expression she wore when events had confirmed a concern she'd previously been too polite to voice. She looked at the ring in her son's hand. She looked at the folded wedding dress. She said nothing for a moment. "She has gone," Nathaniel said. "I can see that." A long silence. "The guests will need to be informed," Margaret said finally. "Yes." "And the minister?" "Yes." "There will be talk." Nathaniel closed his fingers around the ring. "Yes," he said, "there will be." He did not say anything else. He stood at the window of the empty room with his hand closed around the ring that Abigail Carter had left on his pillow, and he looked out at the summer morning, and somewhere below, the careful blankness he was maintaining for his mother's benefit. Something was working its way toward the surface. Something he couldn't name yet. Something he did not have the vocabulary for. Something that felt uncomfortably like the recognition of a loss. He hadn't understood was happening until it was already done. He would understand it better later. He would understand it with a fullness that would hollow him out and rebuild him in a shape he hadn't known he was capable of. But that would come later. For now, he stood in the room Abigail Carter had left and turned her ring over and over in his closed hand and did not know what to do with what he was feeling. Outside, the Virginia summer pressed down on everything. And somewhere on the road north, a coach was carrying Abigail Carter toward Boston, toward Dr. Farnsworth's dispensary, toward the life she was going to build, with her own two steady hands. She did not look back. She never had been someone who looked back. The dispensary on Merchant Street smelled like dried lavender and lye soap, and something underneath both of those things that Abigail recognized immediately, the particular mineral sharpness of a working medical space, the smell of purpose. She stood in the doorway with her satchel over one shoulder and took it in. Dr. Elias Farnsworth was smaller than she had imagined from his letters. He was perhaps 70 years old, with a slight tremor in his left hand that he managed by keeping it occupied when he crossed the room to greet her. He held a glass bottle in that hand, turning it slowly between his fingers as he walked. "Miss Carter," he said, "you look like your father." "People say that," she said. "It is not a complaint." He studied her for a moment, with the frank assessment of a man who had spent 50 years looking at people and deciding what they were made of. "You're thinner than I expected." "It was a long journey." "Sit down then. There's bread on the counter and the kettle is just off the boil." He waved his steady hand toward the back of the room. "We can talk about what you know and what you don't after you've eaten something. I've found hungry physicians make poor impressions." She almost smiled. "I'm not a physician." "Not yet," he said. "Sit down." She sat down. In the weeks that followed, Abigail learned the shape of her new life with the same methodical attention she had always brought to learning anything. Dr. Farnsworth's dispensary served the working district of Boston dockworkers, seamstresses, small tradespeople, the families crammed into the narrow houses along the harbor streets. They came in with burns and broken fingers and fevers that had gone on too long, and children who hadn't stopped coughing since February. They came in with the particular exhaustion of people who had been sick for a while before they could afford to stop and address it. Abigail had grown up with patients like these. She knew how to talk to them, not down to them, not past them, but at them straight and plain, the way her father had. Within 2 weeks, Farnsworth had stopped hovering. Within a month, he had started leaving the harder cases to her while he dealt with the paperwork. "You have good hands," he said one evening after she'd spent 3 hours working with a fisherman whose forearm had been badly torn by a rope line. "Your father had good hands too. It's not a teachable thing. Either a person has the steadiness or they don't." "He taught me to breathe through it," she said, washing her hands at the basin. "Smart man." He was. A pause settled between them. Comfortable, the kind that had begun to characterize their working evenings when the last patients had gone and the light was dropping and there was still compounding to be done. "Do you want to talk about why you're here?" Farnsworth asked. She dried her hands carefully. "I'm here because you offered me work." "That is true," he said. "It is not all of the truth." She looked at him. He was watching her with the particular expression of a man who had seen a great deal of human difficulty and had learned not to press it into shapes it wasn't ready for. "No," she said. "It's not all of the truth." "When you're ready," he said simply, and went back to his ledger. She appreciated that. She appreciated it more than she could have said. Back in Harrowfield, the talk had started within hours. This was inevitable. A wedding canceled on the morning of the ceremony. A bride vanished without explanation. The Brooks family seated at a breakfast table set for 40 guests, with nothing to offer but tight-lipped composure. It was the kind of event a town the size of Harrowfield consumed like a long winter meal, slowly and with great attention to detail. The stories varied depending on who was telling them. Nathaniel heard all of it. He heard it because he did not leave Harrowfield in the weeks that followed, which was itself a choice people noticed and commented on. He could have gone to Philadelphia on business. There was always business in Philadelphia. He could have gone to his cousin's place in Richmond and waited for the talk to thin out. He didn't. He stayed, and he moved through Harrowfield like a man walking through a room where something has been broken very carefully, so as not to cut himself on the pieces he hadn't found yet. He answered questions about Abigail with the same sentence every time. "Miss Carter made her decision, and I respect it." He said it calmly. He said it to his mother's attorney, to his business partners, to the minister who had stayed an extra 2 days on the grounds that perhaps the situation could still be resolved. He said it until it stopped sounding like an answer and started sounding like a thing he was telling himself. His mother watched him. Margaret Brooks had a gift for watching without appearing to watch. She managed the house, received the callers who came with their condolences and their poorly disguised curiosity, and fielded inquiries from the Whitmore family. Their daughter, Caroline, 22, well-bred, already the subject of 2 previous marriage negotiations that had not concluded with the efficient courtesy of a woman who had never considered that any plan once set in motion could not be redirected. She did not speak to Nathaniel about Caroline Whitmore directly. Not yet. She understood the timing of things. But Nathaniel was aware, waiting. It was Emily who found the letters. Emily Brooks was 11 years old and had the particular gift of being entirely overlooked by adults in conversation, which she had long since stopped resenting and had begun to exploit. She was small for her age and quiet in a way that people mistook for shyness, when in fact she was simply listening. She had been listening at Harrowfield for 11 years and had consequently accumulated a comprehensive understanding of exactly how things worked in this house. She had adored Abigail Carter from the first afternoon. Abigail had sat with her in the back garden and answered seriously, and without condescension, every question Emily had about the dried plants in her father's satchel. Most adults answered children's questions the way they addressed servants briefly, while already turning their attention to something else. Abigail had sat for 2 full hours and explained the difference between a tincture and a poultice, and why willow bark worked for fever, and what happened to the body when infection spread unchecked. Emily had decided then that Abigail was the most interesting person she had ever met. She thought about her constantly in the weeks after the wedding that hadn't happened. Thought about the folded dress on the chair she had seen it before Delia had taken it away, had stood in the doorway of that empty room, and understood with the sharp instinct of a child that something very serious had occurred. Something that the adults in the house were going to manage without explaining. She thought about the ring on the pillow. 3 weeks after Abigail left, she found a bundle of letters in the bottom drawer of her brother's writing desk. She had not been looking for them. She had been looking for the map of the Virginia coastline that Nathaniel had promised to show her 2 months ago and had apparently forgotten. The letters were tied with a piece of plain twine, 7 of them all in the same hand, a careful slanted script she recognized immediately. She stood very still. She put the map back. She took the letters. She went to her room, sat on the floor with her back against the foot of the bed, and read every one. They were not love letters. They were something more interesting than love letters. They were letters of intent. Abigail had written to Nathaniel 6 times in the month after her departure. The first was brief and formal, an acknowledgement that she had arrived safely and that she wished him no ill will. The second was longer, more uneven in its rhythm, the way writing becomes when the writer is fighting the urge to say more than they've decided to say. The third had a sentence that Emily read 3 times. "I am not writing to ask you anything. I want you to understand that. I am writing because silence felt like a lie, and I was raised to prefer an uncomfortable truth to a comfortable fiction." The fourth letter was the one that made Emily's chest hurt. "I heard you on the balcony. I want you to know that I heard you. Not because I need you to feel guilty, I don't. I need you to understand that I am not a woman who can build a life on a foundation I know is hollow. I deserve better than that. I believe you are good enough to understand why." The fifth and sixth were quieter, shorter, as if Abigail had said what she needed to say and was now simply continuing. Mentioning the dispensary, the patient's a case that had interested her. Writing the way a person writes when they are not yet ready to stop. The 7th letter was dated 3 weeks after the 6th. It was 4 sentences long. "I haven't heard from you. I didn't expect to. I am going to stop writing now, not because I am angry, but because I think silence is your answer, and I am finally ready to accept it. I hope you learn to be happy, Nathaniel. I genuinely do." Emily sat on the floor of her room for a long time. Then she picked up the letters, went down the hall, and knocked on her brother's study door. "Come in," Nathaniel said. She came in and closed the door and stood in front of his desk and set the letters down on the surface between them without preamble. Nathaniel looked at them. His expression shifted not dramatically, but in the specific way of a person who has just had something private brought suddenly into the light. "Emily," he said. "You didn't answer her," she said. Not an accusation. A statement of fact delivered with the particular precision of an 11-year-old who has learned that the most effective thing she can do is say the exact true thing and then stop talking. "That is my correspondence," he said. "You should not have read it." "I know." She did not move. "You didn't answer her." He was quiet. "She wrote 7 times, Emily said. She told you she heard what you said on the balcony. She wasn't angry. She didn't ask you to apologize or fix it. She just said—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "She said she deserved better, which she does. Nathaniel, she does." "Emily, why didn't you write back?" Howe was quiet for a long moment. He had picked up the letters without seeming to realize he had, and he was holding them the same way he had held the ring closed in his hand, not quite looking at them. "Because I didn't know what to say," he said finally. "That's not a good enough reason." "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." She watched him. "Are you going to write to her now?" He set the letters down on the desk. He smoothed the twine with one finger. He looked out the window. "I don't know," he said. And then, after a moment, with the honesty of a man who is perhaps only beginning to understand what honesty costs, "I want to." "Then do it," Emily said. "She's not someone who waits around Nathaniel. You should know that about her by now." She left the room. Nathaniel sat at his desk for a very long time after she was gone, the letters in front of him the evening, dropping slowly outside the window. Then he pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. He wrote 4 drafts before he was satisfied with none of them and sent the 5th anyway. It arrived at Dr. Farnsworth's dispensary on a Thursday morning in late August in a stack of correspondence that the postal boy left on the counter when Abigail was in the back room compounding a batch of fever tincture. Farnsworth, who sorted the mail as a matter of habit, looked at the handwriting on the outside, looked at the return address, and set it apart from the rest without saying anything. Abigail found it when she came out to wash her hands. She stood at the counter with the letter in both hands and looked at the seal on the back, plain wax, no crest. Nathaniel was not a man who used family crests on personal correspondence. She had not known that about him until now. "You can open it in the back room if you'd prefer privacy," Farnsworth said without looking up from the ledger he was writing in. "I'm fine," she said. She opened it at the counter. She read it standing up, both hands still damp. It was not a long letter. It was not an eloquent letter. It started and stopped in ways that suggested the man who had written it had stopped and started himself more than once. But it was honest. She could feel the honesty of it in the cadence of the sentences, in the places where the language broke down and started over. He said he understood now what she had heard. He said he had not written back sooner because he had been afraid, though he hadn't understood at the time that fear was what he was feeling. He said she had been correct, that she deserved better. He said he was not writing to ask her to return. He was writing because he had promised himself he would stop taking the easy road, and silence had been the easiest road available to him, and he was finished with it. The last line said, "I would like to know that you are well. That is all I am asking. You don't owe me an answer. I know that." Abigail read the letter twice. Then she folded it and set it on the counter. She finished washing her hands. She went back to the fever tincture. That evening, after Farnsworth had gone upstairs, she sat at the small table in the back room and wrote a reply. It took her 40 minutes. It was shorter than his letter. She told him she was well. She told him the dispensary work suited her. She used the word suited specifically the way she might describe a well-made boot, and was aware she was doing it. She did not tell him she had read his letter 3 times. She did not tell him that his acknowledgement had loosened something in her chest that she had not fully realized was knotted. She folded the reply and sealed it and set it with the next morning's outgoing mail. Then she sat at the table for a while longer and thought about the things she had not written. In Harrowfield. 2 days after he sent the letter, Nathaniel's mother summoned him to the parlor. He knew what it was about. He had known it was coming. Margaret sat in the chair by the fireplace with a teacup and the particular upright posture she assumed when she was about to say something, she had decided in advance would not be argued with. "The Whitmore family has extended a formal inquiry," she said. "Caroline is 22. Her father's shipping business is one of the largest in Virginia. The match would benefit this family considerably." "I'm aware of the Whitmores," Nathaniel said. "Then you understand the opportunity." "I understand what you want me to understand," he said. He sat down across from her, which he had learned long ago was better than standing. Standing implied he might leave, and he was not in the habit of leaving difficult conversations. "I am not ready to discuss another engagement." Margaret looked at him. "It has been 6 weeks." "Yes. The appropriate period for mother." He said it quietly, the way she had always said his name when she wanted the conversation to stop heading in the direction it was heading. "I said I am not ready. I would like you to hear that." A pause. "She is not coming." "Nathaniel," Margaret said. Abigail Carter left. She chose to leave. Whatever reasons she had. She had good reasons, he said. A silence that was different from the previous one. "What did you say?" Margaret asked. "I said she had good reasons." He met his mother's gaze steadily. "She heard what I said on the balcony. She heard everything. And she made a decision based on honest information, which is more than I gave her any opportunity to do before that night." He paused. "I am not placing blame on you, but I am not going to pretend in this room or any other that Abigail Carter was wrong to leave." His mother was quiet for a long time. "She left you," she said at last, "in front of the entire county." "Yes. That is not—" "It was her right," he said. "And I am beginning to think it may have been the most honest thing either of us did in the entire engagement." Margaret set down her teacup with the small, careful click that meant she was controlling herself with effort. "I will not pretend to understand what you are trying to say." "I'm not asking you to understand it yet," he said. He stood. "I'm asking you to give me time, that's all." He left the parlor. Margaret sat very still in her chair. Outside the window, the summer was beginning to thin toward autumn. She looked at the garden and thought about things she was not accustomed to thinking about, things that did not arrange themselves neatly into plans and advantages and appropriate timelines. Things that made her uncomfortable in a way she had no ready vocabulary for. She thought about the folded wedding dress. She thought about the ring on the pillow. She had looked at that ring for a long time that morning. She had not said so to anyone. She would not. But she thought about it now. The letter Abigail sent back arrived at Harrowfield on a Monday. Nathaniel read it at his desk, with the particular careful attention of a man reading something for clues he's not sure he's entitled to look for. She was well. The dispensary suited her. The patients were demanding and the work was good. She had written one additional sentence that he read 4 times. "I don't know what correspondence between us looks like now, or if it should exist at all. But I am not interested in pretending I didn't receive your letter." He read that sentence a 5th time. Then he wrote back the same day. The letters became a rhythm. Irregular, sometimes 2 weeks apart, sometimes 5 days, governed by postal schedules and the particular tides of their respective days, but consistent. They found their register within a few exchanges, not the formal language of 2 people managing a concluded situation, not the raw and personal language of people who had earned the right to that intimacy. Something in between. Something that both of them separately knew was not nothing. Nathaniel began telling her things. Not dramatic things, the small observations that he had for most of his life kept interior on the theory that no one particularly needed to hear them. He told her about the argument he'd had with his farm manager about drainage in the south field, and how it had concluded, and why he thought the manager was wrong, even though he'd ended up agreeing with him on procedural grounds. He told her about a book he'd read and the passage in it that had bothered him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. He told her about Emily's latest project, which involved cataloging every bird that visited the back garden with a small hand-drawn journal she had apparently been keeping for 2 years without telling anyone. Abigail wrote back about the dispensary, about a particularly stubborn patient who had refused to follow her recommended course of treatment, and then returned 3 weeks later improved, having apparently followed half of it and substituted his own judgment for the rest. about a woman who had come in with her daughter and sat in the chair across from Abigail and cried not because anything was medically wrong, but because she was tired and had not been asked in a very long time how she was doing, and Abigail had asked. She wrote about that quietly, without extracting a lesson from it, which Nathaniel found himself thinking about for days afterward. How was changing? He could feel it the way you feel a shift in weather, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the accumulation of small things. He was paying attention differently, noticing what he had previously moved past without examining. He did not have a word for what was happening to him, and he was wary of the words other people reached for in such situations, because the words were always larger and more certain than the actual feeling. But he was different than he had been in June. He knew that much. It was in September that Emily got sick. It started the way these things start: a rainy afternoon, a river crossing. She had not told anyone about a soaking she had not thought enough of to mention at dinner. She was 11 years old and had the invincibility common to 11-year-olds, and she had come in wet and changed her clothes and said nothing. By the third day she was feverish. By the fifth day she was worse. Nathaniel sat with her through 2 nights and brought in the county physician, Dr. Hartwell, who was competent and careful and did what he could with what he knew. Emily's fever cycled down in the mornings, spiking again by late afternoon, and there was a deepening cough that Hartwell was monitoring with the specific expression of a man who was not yet alarmed but was becoming concerned. "What does it mean?" Nathaniel asked him in the hallway outside Emily's room, keeping his voice low. "It means we watch," Hartwell said. "The fever isn't broken. The cough concerns me somewhat. We keep her warm, keep the fluids in her." He stopped. "What?" Nathaniel said. Hartwell was quiet for a moment. "There's a case I saw last spring. Similar presentation. I'd want a second opinion." "From whom?" Hartwell hesitated. "There is a physician in Boston. I've heard of his dispensary through colleagues. A Dr. Farnsworth. Old man but sharp. His assistant, I'm told, has particular skill with fever cases and pulmonary presentations. I don't want to alarm you, Mr. Brooks, but if this doesn't turn in the next 2 days, I think you should consider making the trip." Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment. "His assistant," he said. "Yes, a young woman apparently. Carter, I believe the name is. Several physicians in the district have mentioned." "I know who she is," Nathaniel said. Hartwell looked at him, looked at his expression, had the good sense not to say anything further about it. "2 days," Nathaniel said. "If she's not turned in 2 days." I went back into Emily's room and sat in the chair beside her bed. She was awake, barely. Her eyes were heavy, and her face was flushed, and she looked smaller than usual, which frightened him in the specific and wordless way that the vulnerability of people you love frightens you. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice scratchy. "I'm here. I'm sorry I went to the river." "You can apologize properly when you're better," he said. "Right now, I just need you to rest." She was quiet for a moment. "Is it bad?" "We don't know yet. But maybe bad." He looked at her. He had never lied to Emily. She had a particular radar for dishonesty that made it pointless. And more than that, he thought she deserved the truth, even at 11, delivered carefully, but delivered whole. "Maybe," he said. "But we're going to do everything that can be done. You know that." She closed her eyes. "If it gets bad," she said, "you should go get Abigail." He was quiet. "She'd know what to do," Emily said. "She always knows what to do." She fell asleep after that, her breathing shallow and uneven. Nathaniel sat beside her in the dark and listened to the sound of it, and thought about all the things he had only recently begun to understand about what it meant to know what to do and choose not to do it. He did not sleep that night. And by morning, when Emily's fever had not broken and the cough had deepened, he had already made his decision. I was going to Boston. He made the trip in 2 days. He could have taken longer. The road from Harrowfield to Boston was not forgiving in early September, when the rains came sideways and the post roads turned unreliable past the Maryland border. But he pushed the horses harder than was comfortable and slept in the coach both nights and ate what the roadside inns put in front of him without tasting any of it, because Emily's breathing had been wrong when he left, and every hour he was on the road was an hour he was not doing something useful about that fact. He had sent a letter ahead. Short and direct: Emily is ill. Fever 5 days, deepening cough. I am coming to ask your professional opinion. I understand if you cannot help. I am coming anyway. He had not waited for a reply before departing. There was no time to wait for a reply. He arrived at Merchant Street on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of September, climbed down from the coach with stiff legs and 2 days of road on him, and stood in front of the dispensary door for exactly long enough to take one breath. Then he knocked. It was Farnsworth who opened the door. The old man looked at him for a moment, at the travel-worn coat, the set jaw, the particular expression of a man who has been frightened for several days and is managing it by moving forward instead of stopping. Mr. Brooks, Farnsworth said. Dr. Farnsworth, I apologize for arriving without confirmation of your availability. My sister's condition. I know why you're here, Farnsworth said. Your letter arrived yesterday. He stepped back from the door. Come in. Nathaniel stepped inside. The dispensary was smaller than he had imagined from Abigail's letters. It was also more organized than any medical space he had ever entered. Everything in its place, labeled in 2 different hands. The shelves arranged with a precision that spoke of someone who had decided early that the difference between a well-organized supply and a chaotic one was the difference between a patient who recovered and one who didn't. He recognized the second handwriting on the labels. He had been looking at it for 3 months. Abigail was in the back room. He could hear her low, measured voice talking to someone, the specific tone she used when she was explaining something complicated to someone who was scared. He had heard that tone once before. The afternoon Emily had asked her about infection, and he had stood in the garden doorway and listened to it without announcing himself, because he had not had a word for it then. He had a word for it now. She came through the doorway before he could arrange himself into a version of composed. She stopped. For a moment, neither of them said anything. She looked the same. That was his first thought, which he immediately recognized as incomplete. She was the same, but something about the way she occupied the room was different. She stood differently. Straighter, but not with the careful straightness of a woman managing how she appeared. The straightness of someone who had stopped managing that. Nathaniel, she said. Abigail. He reached for something else to say, and found the most important thing first. Emily is sick. I need your help. Something moved across her face, not softening exactly, but a shift in priority. The specific reorganization of a person who has just heard a child's name attached to the word sick. Tell me everything, she said. Sit down and tell me everything from the beginning. He told her. How was thorough? He had always been thorough when it mattered, and this mattered more than anything had in a very long time. He gave her the timeline from the river crossing, the onset of the fever, the cycle of it, the cough, and how it had deepened, what Hartwell had given her, and what the response had been. Abigail listened without interrupting. She had a small notebook open in front of her, and she wrote while he talked, not looking at him, her pen moving in the quick, economical strokes of someone who had learned to capture information in real time. When he finished, she looked at her notes for a moment. 5 days of fever before you left, she said. Yes. Cycling. Down in the morning, rising by afternoon. Consistently. And the cough, is it productive? Is she bringing anything up? He thought about it. Some. Not much. She made a note. Is she keeping food down? Poorly. Water better than food. Has she complained of pain in her chest? Not the cough underneath it. A separate ache. He stopped. She mentioned her chest felt heavy. I thought she meant the cough, Abigail said. Yes. Most people assume that. She closed the notebook and looked at him directly for the first time since he'd sat down. I need to see her. I know. I came to ask. I'm not asking you to ask, she said. I'm telling you I need to see her. How long will it take you to get a return coach organized? He blinked. Tomorrow morning probably. I can arrange. Tomorrow morning is fine. She was already standing. I'll need tonight to prepare what I might need. There are specific compounds for what I'm thinking, and I would rather bring them than try to source them in Harrowfield. She moved towards the shelves, and he watched her begin an assessment of inventory, with the focused speed of someone who had already arrived at a working hypothesis and was not interested in second-guessing it yet. "Abigail," he said. She paused. "Thank you," he said. "I know you don't." He stopped, started again. "I know this is not something you owe me." She looked at him over her shoulder. "It's not something I'm doing for you," she said. "It's something I'm doing for Emily." A pause brief, but he felt the weight of it. "She wrote to me," Abigail said. "Did you know that 3 letters since June? She told me about the bird journal." He had not known that. "No," he said. "I didn't. She's 11, and she kept in contact with me when the adults in her life had decided the situation was concluded." Abigail turned back to the shelves. "The least I can do is return the courtesy." He did not say anything else. He sat in the chair in the front room of the dispensary and watched her work and listened to the sounds of Boston through the walls and felt something shift in him, not dramatically, not in the way the novels would have it, quietly. The way something shifts when a person you have been wrong about stands in front of you, doing something that illustrates exactly how wrong you were, and you have enough honesty left in you to see it clearly. Farnsworth appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. He looked at Nathaniel sitting in the chair. He looked at Abigail moving along the shelves. He did not say anything for a long moment. "You'll want the back room to work, Abby," he said finally. "I'll manage the evening patients." "Thank you," she said without turning around. Farnsworth looked at Nathaniel once more. The look was brief and encompassing, and communicated several things without bothering to use words for any of them. Then he went back through the doorway. Nathaniel sat very still. He was thinking about Emily's face when she'd said, "Go get Abigail." The particular faith in it, the uncomplicated certainty of a child who had identified the most capable person available, and could not understand why the adults in the room were making it complicated. He was thinking about his own letters to Abigail and hers back, and the particular sentence she had written in the very first one, "I am not interested in pretending I didn't receive your letter." He had turned that sentence over in his mind so many times it had worn smooth, and he still wasn't entirely sure what he'd been looking for in it. Permission, maybe. Evidence of something he hadn't earned the right to name. He was thinking about the balcony. He did that less than he used to. In the first weeks after Abigail left, he had replayed that conversation constantly, picking it apart. For the moment he could point to and say there, "That's where I was wrong," as if identifying the error was the same thing as correcting it. He understood now that it wasn't. He had been wrong before the balcony had been wrong in the months of the engagement, moving through a future that affected another person's entire life, as if it were primarily an administrative matter that required his management rather than her participation. He had never asked her what she wanted. Not once. Not the way you ask someone when the answer might inconvenience you. How was different now? He couldn't prove that to anyone. He wasn't even sure he could prove it to himself. But he knew what he'd been, and he knew what he was working toward, and the distance between those two things was real. "You can go to your lodging," Abigail said. She hadn't turned around. "I'll have everything ready by 5 in the morning." "I'll stay," he said. A pause in her movement. "Nathaniel, not for any reason that concerns you," he said. "I simply don't want to be across the city while you're preparing treatment for my sister. I'll sit here and I won't trouble you." She turned then and looked at him. She was weighing something. He could see her doing it, the same expression she wore when she was deciding how to respond to a patient's statement that she suspected was not entirely accurate. "Fine," she said. "There's bread on the counter. Farnsworth always leaves bread." She went back to work. He found the bread. He sat back down. And for the first time in 3 days, the frantic forward motion that had been carrying him stopped long enough for him to simply be in a room, and the room happened to contain Abigail Carter. And something about that was, he did not finish the thought. He ate the bread and watched her work and said nothing, and after a while, that said enough by itself. Farnsworth came back through at 7 o'clock after the last patient had gone. He sat down heavily in the other chair, poured himself a cup of tea from the pot Abigail had made without being asked, and looked at Nathaniel with the frank appraisal of a man who had earned the right to be direct. "She's good," Farnsworth said. "Better than good. I want you to understand that whatever your history is, what that woman does in this dispensary, the cases she has managed, the people who have come through that door and left better than they arrived. She did that. Not me. My hands are finished and my eyes are going, and she knows it, and she has not once made me feel diminished by any of it." He drank his tea. "I am telling you this because you have the expression of a man who is about to do something important and is not sure he deserves to." Nathaniel looked at him. "Is that what my expression says?" "It is exactly what your expression says." Farnsworth set the cup down. "I am not giving you advice. I am too old and too tired to manage other people's situations. I am simply telling you what I see when I look at that woman, so that whatever you do next, you do it with accurate information." He got up and went upstairs. Nathaniel sat with that for a long time. At 8:30, the door to the dispensary opened. Nathaniel had not heard footsteps on the street outside, which was why the sound startled him. He turned in his chair as a woman stepped through the door, mid-40s, well-dressed in the specific way of Boston's merchant class, moving with the confident stride of someone who did not knock before entering spaces where she had decided she had business. She stopped when she saw Nathaniel. Recovered quickly. "I'm looking for Miss Carter," the woman said. Abigail came out of the back room at the sound of the voice. "Mrs. Calder," she said. "I didn't expect you this evening." "I know. I'm sorry for the hour." Mrs. Calder looked at Nathaniel again. A brief assessment, the kind that social women do automatically and invisibly. She looked back at Abigail. "I can come back in the morning." "It's all right," Abigail said. "Come through." She led Mrs. Calder to the back room. Nathaniel heard the door close. He heard the low murmur of voices. Abigail's steady and quiet. Mrs. Calder's more uneven, the particular rhythm of someone who is saying something they have been building up to for a while. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Calder came back through the front room with red eyes and a composed face and the kind of expression that women wear when they have said something hard and are grateful to have said it. She nodded briefly at Nathaniel and went out. Abigail came through a moment later and began washing her hands at the basin. "Is she all right?" Nathaniel said. "She will be." Abigail dried her hands. Her husband has been ill for 6 months, and she's been managing it alone and pretending at dinner parties that everything is fine. She needed to tell someone who wouldn't panic or offer advice. A pause. Sometimes that's the whole of it. Just telling someone who will listen. She said it simply, without significance. She was already moving back toward the shelves, back toward the compounds she was assembling for Emily. But he sat with the sentence. Sometimes that's the whole of it. Just telling someone who will listen. He had spent 4 months writing her letters, and she had written back, and for the first time he thought he understood why not. What it meant about the future, not what it indicated about either of them, but what it had been in itself. 2 people telling each other things, and one of them at least finally listening. They left at 5 the next morning. Farnsworth stood at the dispensary door as they loaded the coach, holding the leather case Abigail had packed with the particular care of a man sending a soldier back to a field he would not see himself. 2 weeks, Abigail said. 3 at the outside. Once the girl is stable, I'll return. Take what time you need, Farnsworth said. He looked at her for a moment. You know what you're doing, Abby. I know what I'm doing medically, she said. That's what I said, he replied, and went back inside. She stood on the step for a moment, looking at the closed door. Then she climbed into the coach. Nathaniel was across from her. The road was long, and the early morning was gray and cold. Neither of them spoke for the first hour, which was not uncomfortable. It had the particular quality of silence between people who have established through letters enough familiarity that silence no longer requires filling. It was Abigail who broke it. Tell me about the last 3 days, she said. Not the medical facts. I have those. Tell me what it was like. He looked at her. Why? Because you've been frightened since you arrived and you haven't said so once, and I want to know what I'm working with. She met his gaze steadily. Emily trusts me. I need to understand what's happened in that when she's better." He was quiet for a moment. "It's been hard," he said, sitting with her, watching the fever cycle and not being able to do anything useful. "Hard in what way?" He thought about it. She is not someone who requires much from other people. She manages things herself. She observes things and processes them, and arrives at her own conclusions without needing me to guide her." He paused. "It frightens me that she's sick in a way that it would not frighten me if she were. I don't know how to explain it." "It frightens you because she's competent," Abigail said. "Because you've come to rely on her competence the way you rely on everything that seems self-sufficient. And watching something self-sufficient become fragile, that's a particular kind of fear." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly it." A pause. "I know something about that kind of fear," she said. Not bitterly, just truthfully. He understood what she meant. "Abigail," he said. "Don't," she said, not harshly. "Not in a coach, not when we're going to Emily." She looked out the window. "There will be time for the rest of it later. Right now, there's just the work." He nodded. He looked at his hands. "Thank you," he said, "for coming." "I told you," she said. "This is for Emily." "I know," he said. "I'm thanking you anyway." She didn't answer. But she didn't tell him to stop either. And for a man who had spent 3 months learning to hear what wasn't said, that was not nothing. They arrived at Harrowfield at dusk on the second day. Nathaniel went straight upstairs. Emily was awake. She looked smaller than she had 4 days ago. The fever had pressed the brightness out of her somewhat, and she was lying in a position that suggested even lifting her arms required calculation. But her eyes found Nathaniel's immediately when he came through the door, and then found the figure behind him, and what happened to her face was not dramatic in the way stories reach for drama. It was simply relief, direct and unguarded, and entirely 11 years old. "You went," Emily said. "I went," Nathaniel said. "And she came." Emily looked at Abigail with an expression that went well beyond gratitude. It was the expression of a child who has believed in something against the available evidence and been proved right. Abigail crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Emily with the same focused attention she had given every patient who had ever sat across from her in the dispensary. She took Emily's wrist in 2 fingers. She asked her to breathe. She watched her breathe. She asked several questions in a tone so calm and ordinary that Emily answered them all without anxiety, which was itself part of the purpose. Nathaniel stood back. He watched Abigail work, and he felt he did not have one word for it. Several words all true at once. Gratitude. Recognition. Something quieter and more durable than either of those things. Something that had been building since the first letter and had no interest in being named prematurely. "All right," Abigail said. She had a small tin from the leather case, and she set it on the bedside table. "The fever is not as bad as I was worried it might be. The cough is the part I want to treat. This," she held up the tin, "tastes terrible, and I need you to take it 3 times a day without arguing with me about it." Emily looked at the tin. "How terrible." "Spectacularly terrible." "Will it work?" "Yes," Emily considered. "All right," she said. "But you have to stay until I'm better." Abigail looked at her. "That was the plan," she said. "I know." Emily settled back against the pillow with the satisfaction of someone whose planning has paid off. "I just wanted to hear you say it." Nathaniel looked at his sister. He looked at Abigail. He thought not for the first time that Emily had understood everything faster than he had, and was 11 years old, and he was not quite sure what that said about him. He thought it might say something worth paying attention to. Margaret Brooks knew Abigail had arrived before she heard her voice. It was Delia who told her, Delia who always managed the house's information with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that the right person, having the right information at the right time, was its own form of order. Margaret had been in the sitting room reviewing correspondence when Delia appeared in the doorway, and the expression on Delia's face told her everything in the time it took to set down her pen. "Miss Carter is here," Delia said. "Mr. Brooks brought her back from Boston, for Miss Emily." Margaret was quiet. "She arrived with a medical case," Delia said. "She's been with Miss Emily for the past hour." "Thank you, Delia." Delia nodded and withdrew. Margaret sat with her correspondence untouched for a long time. She was not whatever she allowed people to assume a woman without feeling. She had a great deal of feeling. She simply had long ago made the decision to manage it rather than be managed by it, a decision that had served her well in a life that had required a great deal of management. The Brooks estate, the family's financial interests, the social architecture of a family's reputation, in a county where reputation was currency. None of that had happened without her sustained and deliberate attention. But she sat now and thought about Abigail Carter sitting on the edge of Emily's bed, which she had not witnessed but could picture with uncomfortable clarity, and she felt something she did not have a ready category for. She had been wrong. She was precise enough in her own thinking to know that. She had assessed Abigail Carter as a manageable piece of a larger arrangement, and she had been wrong, and the wrongness had cost her son something she could see in his face every time he thought no one was watching. Something that was slowly, and she did not like this word, but accuracy required it, healing. She stood up. She went to Emily's room. The door was open. Abigail was seated beside the bed writing in her notebook, and Emily was asleep. Nathaniel was not there. He had likely gone to see to the horses. The room was quiet. The evening light was soft. Abigail looked up when she heard the footstep. She looked at Margaret. She did not change her expression, but she set her pen down. Margaret stepped into the room. She kept her voice low out of consideration for Emily. "Miss Carter," she said. "Mrs. Brooks," Abigail said. A silence. Margaret looked at Emily sleeping, at the small tin on the bedside table, at the leather case opened on the floor beside Abigail's chair, organized with a precision that looked, she noted, despite herself, a great deal like her own. "How is she?" Margaret asked. "Better than I feared," Abigail said. "The cough is the concern. The compounds I've brought should address it in 5 to 7 days if she tolerates the course. Her fever is manageable." A pause. "She's strong. You've raised a very strong child, Mrs. Brooks." Margaret looked at her. The compliment was genuine. That was clear. There was no edge in it, no calculation. Abigail said it the way she said everything, which was directly and without decoration. "Thank you," Margaret said. It came out quieter than she intended. "I intend to stay until she's stable," Abigail said. "If that is agreeable." "Of course," Margaret said. "You are, yes, of course." She turned to leave. "Mrs. Brooks." She stopped. Abigail was looking at her steady, the way Abigail always looked at people, as if she were reading something in them that they had not decided to show. "I'm not here to create difficulty," Abigail said. "I want you to know that. I am here for Emily. What happens beyond that is not something I've decided, and it's not something I'm asking you to decide for me." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said. "I don't imagine it is." She left. She walked down the hall with her spine straight and her hands still, and the unaccustomed and not entirely unpleasant sensation of having been spoken to plainly and without spite by someone who had every reason to be less generous. It was the first time in a long time that Margaret Brooks had been spoken to that way. She was surprised to find that she did not dislike it. 3 days into Emily's treatment, the cough began to break. It happened slowly, a shift in the quality of it, the productive loosening that Abigail had been watching for. Emily herself noticed it before anyone told her, and the look on her face when she registered the improvement was Nathaniel, who was sitting in the chair by the window when it happened, had to look away for a moment. "It's getting better," Emily said with a mixture of relief and vindication. "It is," Abigail agreed. She was listening to Emily's breathing in the careful way she had 2 fingers against the side of Emily's neck. Her eyes not looking at anything in particular, all her attention gathered inward. "You have been a model patient, which I know was not easy for you." "The medicine is disgusting," Emily said. "I know. The worst thing I have ever tasted." "I believe you." "Will I have to keep taking it after it stops tasting that bad?" 2 more days after you feel entirely better," Abigail said. "That's the part most people skip, and it's the most important part." Emily made a face. Then she looked at Abigail with the direct assessment she had apparently inherited from no one in her family and everyone she admired. "Are you and Nathaniel going to be all right?" she asked. Abigail was quiet for a moment. "That's a large question." "I'm 11, Emily said. "I don't have time for small questions." Abigail looked at her. Something that was almost amusement moved across her face. "I don't know," she said. "Honestly." "He's different," Emily said. "I need you to know that. Since June. He notices things now. He read the letters you sent me. He asked me about the birds." She paused. "He never asked about the birds before." Abigail said nothing, but she was listening in the way she listened to patients with her whole body still present. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," Emily said. "That's not my place. She stopped. "I just wanted you to know that it mattered. Whatever you said to him, it mattered." Abigail looked at her hands for a moment. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "You're going to make me take that medicine 2 more days after I feel better, aren't you?" Emily said. "Absolutely," Abigail said. Emily sighed the sigh of an 11-year-old who has made her peace with something. "Fine," she said, and closed her eyes. It was on the 5th day that Nathaniel found her in the garden. He had been looking for her without quite admitting he was looking for her. She had been at Harrowfield for 5 days, and they had moved around each other with the particular care of people who had things to say and had agreed without discussing it that the timing needed to be right. They worked around Emily. They were civil at meals in a way that was not strained. It was actually easy, which was its own kind of complication. Margaret had been quiet and observant and had stopped mentioning Caroline Whitmore, which Nathaniel noticed. Abigail was sitting on the low stone wall at the edge of the back garden with her notebook open on her knee. She was not writing. She was looking at the distance with the expression of someone who is doing complex interior work. He sat down on the wall a few feet away. She glanced at him, went back to looking at the distance. "She's improving," he said, significantly. Abigail turned a page in the notebook without writing on it. "Another 4 days and I'll feel confident she's past the danger." "Good." He was quiet. "I want to say something and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She looked at him. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know that. I have known it since June, and I know it more clearly now than I did then. I am not here to collect anything or ask for anything you have not offered." He paused. He had rehearsed this, not the specific words, but the shape of it, what it needed to contain, and what it needed to leave out. "I was wrong. In the way I thought about our engagement and what I was offering you. I offered you a position, not a partnership. I treated your life as a secondary variable in something I was managing for other reasons. That was wrong. I don't expect you to accept an apology for it. I just need you to know that I see it. Clearly. And that the person I was when I said what I said on that balcony is not I am working very hard every day not to be that person anymore." Abigail was quiet for a long time. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "The letters told me," she said. "Not what you said in them. How you said it." She turned the notebook over in her hands. "You changed the way you wrote. Between the first letter and the last. The first one was organized. Correct. Like a business communication from a man who had decided to do the right thing and was executing it efficiently." She paused. "The last 3 were different. You stopped being efficient. You said things you hadn't decided were worth saying yet. You asked me things without being sure you wanted the answer." Howe was quiet. "That's when I started to think," she said, "that maybe there was something in you that was actually changing. Not because I needed to be right about you, but because the evidence suggested it." "What did you think?" he said. She looked at him. "I thought I didn't know yet," she said. "I thought I needed to see it in person." She looked down at the notebook. "I still don't know. I want you to understand that. I am not making any promises or arriving at any conclusions. I am a woman who has built a life she is proud of, and any future I consider has to fit around that life, not the other way around." "Yes," he said. He said it without hesitation, which she noticed. and I am going to need a significant period of demonstrable behavior before anything I think or feel is going to be relevant to any decision." "I understand." "I am not saying this gently," she said. "I am saying it plainly, because I have learned that plain language saves a great deal of time and pain." "I know," he said. "I prefer it." She looked at him. He looked back. "All right," she said. "Not as agreement to any future, not as forgiveness, as the close of a chapter and the careful, unannounced beginning of whatever came after it." She opened her notebook. She began to write. He sat on the wall beside her and watched the afternoon move across the garden and did not say anything else, because he had learned finally, at significant cost, that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is stay and be quiet and let someone else occupy their own space in their own time. It was not a small thing that he had learned it. Inside the house, Emily was sleeping. Her breathing was clean and even. And somewhere down the hall, Margaret Brooks was sitting at her writing desk, not writing anything and thinking for the third time that day about the word partnership, which she had heard through the open garden window, and which was sitting in her mind with the particular insistence of something that refuses to be filed away. Emily was well enough to sit up by the 8th day. She did it with the particular triumph of someone who has been horizontal for too long and intends to make the most of verticality. She pushed herself upright against the headboard, demanded her bird journal, and informed Abigail that she had heard a warbler outside her window 2 mornings ago and needed to record it before the details faded. "You were running a fever 2 mornings ago," Abigail said, handing her the journal. "I know," Emily said, "but I still heard it." Abigail looked at her for a moment. Then she sat down in the chair beside the bed and said, "Tell me what it sounded like. I'll help you write it down." Nathaniel stood in the doorway and watched this exchange and felt something he had no adequate language for. Not sentiment exactly, but the particular recognition of a person seeing 2 things. They value occupying the same space and understanding with sudden clarity how much he wanted that to continue. He did not say anything. He turned quietly and went back down the hall. He had been doing that a great deal in the past 8 days, watching Abigail in the specific way of a man who has stopped trying to manage what he sees and has started simply looking. She moved through Harrowfield without apology. She sat at their dinner table and spoke her mind when she had something to say, and was quiet when she didn't, and neither her silence nor her speech required anyone's permission. She was not performing comfort or ease. She simply was comfortable in herself, which was a thing Nathaniel had not previously understood, was different from the performance of it. It was a thing he was still learning to be. On the 9th day, Margaret asked Abigail to take tea with her. Abigail said yes. Nathaniel knew about it only because Delia mentioned it with the careful neutrality of someone passing along information. She is aware is significant without wishing to comment on its significance. He spent the 40 minutes of that tea doing absolutely nothing productive in his study, and being aware that he was doing nothing productive and not being able to correct it. He did not know what they said to each other. He did not ask Abigail afterward because it was not his to ask. He did not ask his mother because Margaret's private conversations were Margaret's. But he noticed at dinner that evening that something had shifted between the 2 women. Not warmth, exactly, not yet, but a different quality of attention. The way 2 people sit at a table when they have each said something true to the other and are still deciding what to do with that truth. Emily noticed too, which he could tell, because she went very still and very quiet in the way she did when she was paying close attention to something adults were doing that they hadn't announced. After dinner, when Abigail had gone back upstairs to check on her compounds and Emily had been sent to rest, Nathaniel found his mother in the sitting room. "How was tea?" he said. Margaret looked up from her needlework. "It was tea," she said. "We spoke. About things that were between us to speak about." She went back to the needlework. Then after a moment, "She is direct." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "She is." "It is not what I expected," Margaret said. "Not a complaint, an honest observation." "What did you expect?" She was quiet. "I expected her to be angry," she said. "I think I assumed that was her right and that she would exercise it." The needlework rested in her lap. She wasn't angry. She searched for the word. Specific. She said specific things very calmly and asked me specific questions and listened to the answers as if she actually intended to use the information. Nathaniel sat down across from her. What did you tell her? His mother looked at him in a way she did not look at him often. Not managerial, not strategic, but something older and less certain. I told her I had made decisions that treated her as a variable rather than a person, and that I was sorry for it. A pause. In those words. He was quiet. It is not a thing I have said to many people, Margaret said. I know. She accepted it, his mother said, without making me explain further, without holding it. She picked up the needlework again. She is not what I assessed her to be. No, Nathaniel agreed. She isn't. Margaret stitched for a moment. Don't waste it, she said. She said it without looking up. Whatever opportunity is in front of you, don't manage it and call that enough. He looked at his mother. She did not say anything further. He got up and went quietly out. The Merchants' Assembly dinner was held the second Saturday of October at the Cavendish Hall in Boston. It had been scheduled since August, an annual gathering of the region's significant business families, the kind of event that Margaret had always treated as both social obligation and strategic opportunity. It was the venue she had chosen months ago, in a plan that felt from this distance like something from another person's life, to announce the new engagement between Nathaniel and Caroline Whitmore. Nathaniel had known this. He had not known what he intended to do about it until 10 days ago. Now he knew. The difficulty was that Abigail was scheduled to return to Boston the Thursday before the dinner. Emily was well, genuinely well. The color back in her face, and the warbler fully catalogued, and 2 new birds added since. And she had been taking the final course of medicine with only moderate complaint, which Abigail declared a victory. The work at Harrowfield was done. There was no medical reason for Abigail to stay. She told him so on Wednesday evening, standing in the corridor outside Emily's room with her leather case in her hand, and the specific expression of someone who is being precise, because precision is how she protects herself. I'm leaving tomorrow morning, she said. I know. Emily's final course runs through Sunday. She knows what to do. I've left written instructions. I know. She looked at him. Nathaniel, there's a dinner Saturday, he said. In Boston. I need to be there. I would like... He stopped, reorganized. I have something I need to do at that dinner, something I should have done months ago, and I want you to know it's happening because it concerns you, and I don't... He stopped again. You deserve to not be surprised by things that concern you. I have done enough of that. She was very still. What are you going to do? End something that should not have started, he said. Publicly, because my mother made it public, and the correction should be public too. He met her gaze directly. I am not doing it to win something from you. I want you to understand that. I'm doing it because it's right. What you do with it afterward is entirely yours. She looked at him for a long time. Will you be there? He said. At the dinner. Farnsworth attends, I believe, the physician's table. If you are there, I would like you to hear it from me directly rather than through someone else's account. She was quiet. You are not obligated, he said. I know I'm not obligated, she said. I know exactly what I'm obligated to do and what I'm not. You don't have to tell me. But there was no sharpness in it. I'll be there. Farnsworth does attend. I usually accompany him. Good, he said. Don't mistake my being there for a decision, she said. I'm there for Farnsworth. I understand. Nathaniel. Yes. Don't make a scene for my sake, she said. Do it because it's true. That's the only reason worth doing it. He looked at her. It is the only reason, he said. I promise you that. She picked up her case. She went to the end of the corridor. She paused with her hand on the door. She did not look back, but she said quietly, not quite to him, not quite to herself, I'll see you Saturday. Then she was gone. The Cavendish Hall was full by 8 o'clock. It was the kind of gathering that happened in a specific register of formal ease. Everyone dressed with intention. Conversations layered the real business of the evening conducted in asides and positioning, and the careful management of who was seen standing with whom. Nathaniel had attended these dinners since he was old enough to be brought to them. He knew their rhythms. He knew how to move through them. Tonight he moved through them differently. He arrived with his mother, which was expected. He was civil to every person who approached him, which was also expected. He found Farnsworth's table with his eyes within the first 10 minutes, which he had not expected to be the first thing he did, and yet it was. Abigail was seated beside Farnsworth in a dark blue dress he had not seen before, talking to a woman across the table with the focused attention she brought to all conversations. She did not look toward him when he came in. He had not expected her to. He found his table. He sat down. He had an hour before the formal portion of the evening, and he used it talking to business partners about shipping routes and tobacco prices and the new federal tariffs, conducting himself with the surface competence of a man who knew this territory and had the presence of mind to navigate it. Underneath the surface, he was doing something else entirely, which was making sure of himself. Not the decision had been made. He was making sure of why. He sat across from men he had known for years and talked about commerce, and felt with each exchange, more certain that what he was about to do was not for an audience, or for Abigail, or for the abstract satisfaction of a right action. It was for the specific practical reason that he had spent 31 years arranging his life around what was expected of him, and the results were that he had nearly married a woman he'd failed to see, and had spent 4 months becoming someone better by writing letters in the dark, and was sitting in a room full of people who assumed they knew exactly what he was going to do next. How was going to do something else. His mother was seated 2 chairs down. She had not spoken to him about Caroline Whitmore since the conversation in the parlor at Harrowfield. She had said, "Don't waste it," and she had let it sit. He glanced at her once across the table, and she was looking at him already with the expression she wore when she had assessed a situation and had stopped trying to manage the outcome. Not approval. His mother was too careful to deploy approval prematurely. But something adjacent. Something that looked at this distance like trust. He looked away. At the Whitmore table, 3 rows to the left, Mr. Cornelius Whitmore was holding court with the genial expansiveness of a man anticipating a satisfying evening. Caroline Whitmore sat beside him, composed and lovely, and entirely unaware, as far as Nathaniel could tell, that the evening was about to go somewhere different than her father had suggested. Nathaniel looked at her. Really looked the way he had only recently learned to look at people, rather than through them. She was pleasant. She was well-bred. She had done nothing wrong. Whatever happened tonight would not be something he did to her. It would be something he corrected for all of them. The dinner concluded at 9:30. The host, a heavy-set man named Alderman Prescott, rose to begin the social addresses, the portion of the evening where business announcements were made and acknowledged, and the room's attention was collected and redistributed. It was theater, but it was useful theater, and everyone present understood its function. Prescott made 2 announcements. Then he looked toward the Brooks table, with the anticipatory expression of a man who has been told there is a 3rd announcement forthcoming and is expecting something pleasant. "I believe," Prescott said, "that Mr. Nathaniel Brooks has something to share with the room this evening." Nathaniel stood. The room settled. 100 conversations fell away. He felt the weight of the attention without being troubled by it. He had stood in rooms like this before, and the attention of other people had never been the thing that frightened him. What had frightened him was the truth. He was done being frightened of the truth. "Thank you, Alderman Prescott," he said. His voice carried well. He did not raise it. "I had originally intended this evening to serve as the occasion for a particular announcement. I find that I am making a different one." The room was absolutely quiet. He could feel his mother without looking at her. "Several months ago," he said, "a woman named Abigail Carter left this county and this community. She left because she was given honest information about her situation, and she responded to that information with the intelligence and integrity that characterize everything she does. She was not the source of whatever difficulty followed. I was. That distinction matters, and I should have said so publicly some time before tonight." He did not look at Abigail's table. He had made that decision deliberately. This was not a performance directed at her. She was not the audience. I also want to say, he continued, that I will not be formalizing any engagement this evening or at any other time in the near future. The Whitmore family is a distinguished one, and Miss Caroline Whitmore is a fine person who deserves a partner who has chosen her specifically and freely. She deserves what everyone in this room deserves, including people who are not in this room, the chance to be seen accurately by someone who is looking. He paused. That is what I have to say. I'm sorry for taking up the time. He sat down. The silence held for 3 full seconds. Then it broke into the specific controlled chaos of a room full of people who have been given something significant to react to and are doing their reacting simultaneously. Nathaniel picked up his water glass and drank from it, and looked at the tablecloth and waited for the noise to become specific enough to address. Across the room at the Whitmore table. Cornelius Whitmore's face had gone through several colors and settled on a controlled red that indicated fury being managed for the sake of the audience. Caroline Whitmore beside him had an expression that Nathaniel could not read. From this distance he thought it might be something closer to relief than offense, but he could not be certain, and he would think about that later, when there was time to think about things carefully. His mother was very still. He finally looked at her. She was looking at him with the expression she reserved for things that had surprised her past the point of management. She did not say anything. She picked up her teacup. She drank from it. When she set it back down, something in her posture had changed almost imperceptibly, the kind of change you would only notice if you had spent 31 years learning to read a specific person. She had straightened, but differently. Not with the straightness of performance. With something that looked, he thought, like relief. He found Abigail afterward in the corridor outside the hall, where she had apparently come to get air and was standing against the wall with her arms at her sides, and the particular expression of someone who is feeling several large things and organizing them in order. She looked at him when he came through the door. That was not a scene, she said. No, he agreed. It wasn't. It was... She stopped. It was honest. Yes. You didn't look at me, she said. When you were speaking. I know. Why not? He stood a few feet from her. Because it wasn't for you, he said. I told you that. I meant it. She looked at him for a long moment. The corridor was quiet. The noise of the room was muffled by the closed door and the September air coming through the window. At the end of the hall was cold and clean. What you said, she said. About everyone deserving to be seen accurately. By someone who is looking. She paused. Did you write that out beforehand? No, he said. I just said what was true, he said. I've found that's easier lately, saying what's true. I don't know when that changed. She was quiet. I do know, he said. It changed in June. It changed because of what you did. What you chose. I left, she said. That's all I did. I left. You left without anger, he said. You folded the dress and left the ring and walked out without a word of recrimination, and you wrote me 7 letters that were more honest than anything I had said to you in 4 months of engagement, and then you stopped writing when I didn't answer, and you got on with your life. He looked at her. That is not all you did. That is... He stopped. That is the most instructive thing anyone has ever done in my presence. She was quiet for a long time. Nathaniel, she said. I know, he said. I know what you said. I'm not asking you for anything tonight. I'm not... He took a breath. I just want you to know that whatever you decide about the dispensary, about Boston, about any of it, I intend to earn the right to ask you the question. Not tonight. Not in a corridor after a dinner where I just made a speech about you in front of 100 people. A pause. I am asking you for a chance. To show you over time by actions. That's all I'm asking. She looked at him. A chance, she said. Yes. Not a guarantee. God, no, he said. I know better than to ask you for a guarantee. She looked down at her hands. She looked back up at him. I told you in the coach that I don't make decisions on insufficient evidence, she said. That hasn't changed. I know. The evidence is better than it was, she said. I want to be precise about that. It is better. It is not yet complete. I understand. And my work in Boston is yours, he said. Completely and without condition. I would not have it any other way. I think actually that your work is the thing I think it is one of the things I most. He stopped. He was struggling with the language in a way that was new and uncomfortable, and also, he recognized correct. I think your work is something I want in my life, he said finally. Not around it, in it. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not dramatically, not the way it happens in stories. Quietly. The way things shift in real life, when a person has been waiting without admitting to themselves that they are waiting, and something arrives that is close enough to what they were waiting for, that they have to stop pretending. All right, she said. All right. All right, she said. A chance. Demonstrated over time, by actions. She met his gaze steadily. I will be watching, Nathaniel. I want you to know that. I watch everything. I know, he said. I'm counting on it. A pause. Behind them through the door. The noise of the room had reorganized itself into the specific hum of 100 people conducting the business of having witnessed something unexpected. Nathaniel was aware he would have to go back in eventually. He was aware of Cornelius Whitmore's likely trajectory of fury and the conversations he would need to have and the professional diplomacy the situation required. He was also aware that none of that was the most important thing happening in this corridor. Go back in, Abigail said. You have things you need to manage. I know. I'm going to find Farnsworth. Yes. She stepped forward. She passed close enough to him that there was a moment, not dramatic, not anything that required explanation, where she paused. Not to say something, not to do anything. Just the particular pause of a person who is marking a point in time before it becomes the past. Then she walked back down the corridor. He watched her go. Then he straightened his coat and went back through the door into the noise. Cornelius Whitmore found him within 4 minutes. He was a large man, with a large man's sense of physical authority, and he planted himself in front of Nathaniel with the expression of someone who has been publicly disadvantaged and intends to make that fact known to the person responsible. Brooks, he said. That was Mr. Whitmore, Nathaniel said. He kept his voice even. I owe you an apology, and I intend to give you a proper one. My mother communicated a plan that I should have addressed before it advanced to the stage it reached. I'm sorry for the public nature of the correction. Your daughter is an admirable young woman, and she deserved better than being attached to an arrangement that was never actually going to serve her. Whitmore's expression went through several stages. That's all very well, he said. But the public embarrassment is mine, Nathaniel said. I will own it. I am the one who let something proceed past the point where I should have stopped it. If there are professional conversations that need to happen as a result, I am prepared to have them. He met the older man's eyes. But I will not pretend that a marriage designed primarily to consolidate assets would have been good for Caroline. She is 22. She has a right to more than that. Whitmore stared at him. His fury was still there, but underneath it something was working, the specific machinery of a man who has heard something true that he did not intend to hear. His daughter was 22. She was at the table right now. He would look at her later tonight, and he would think about what Nathaniel Brooks had said in front of 100 people, and it would cost him something to think about it honestly. We'll talk, Whitmore said finally. Not warmly, but with the particular compression of a man who has decided to table something rather than burn it. Yes, Nathaniel said. We will. Whitmore moved away. Nathaniel stood for a moment in the middle of the room, alone in the way a person is alone in a crowd when they have just done something large and are absorbing the dimensions of it. He was aware of being looked at. He was aware of several clusters of conversation that had reoriented toward him. He was aware that his name would be in a great many letters tomorrow morning, traveling in every direction out of Boston, and that the shape of his reputation was going to look different by the end of next week. I was also aware that none of that was the thing he was thinking about. He was thinking about a corridor and a pause and a woman who watched everything. His mother appeared at his elbow with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been managing a situation from across the room and has now closed the distance. Whitmore, she said. Managed, he said. Temporarily. I'll speak to his wife in the morning. A pause. The room is... I know. You handled it well. She said it without looking at him, which was how she delivered the things she meant most. The speech. You were plain. That was right. He looked at her. You told me not to waste it. I did, she said. I didn't. A pause. No, she said. You didn't. And then, with the particular effort of a woman who has spent a lifetime maintaining composure as a form of control, and is choosing in this moment to set that down, I'm proud of you, Nathaniel. He stood very still. She had not said that to him in a very long time. Perhaps she had never said it in quite that way, not for a result he had achieved, but for a thing he had chosen. Thank you, Mother, he said. She straightened her glove. She smoothed the cuff of her sleeve. She turned to assess the room with the eyes of a woman who has navigated complicated social terrain for 30 years and can read a room the way a sailor reads weather. Give me 20 minutes, she said. I'll have the worst of the conversations done. She moved away into the crowd. He watched her go and thought about all the ways a person can change, and all the ways they stay exactly the same, and how sometimes those two things are not in conflict at all. Farnsworth found him an hour later at the edge of the room. The old man stood beside him and looked out at the crowd with the amiable detachment of someone who comes to these events for the food and considers the social dynamics a form of entertainment. Interesting evening, Farnsworth said. Yes. She didn't take the coach back tonight, Farnsworth said. Abigail. She's staying at the Whitfield house, the widow Calder's place. She'll be back at the dispensary by Sunday. Nathaniel looked at him. You're telling me this why? Because you look like a man who needed to know it, Farnsworth said. And because I'm old and direct, and I stopped managing the delivery of information some time ago. He drank whatever was in his glass. She told me what you said to her in the corridor. Nathaniel waited. She didn't tell me how she felt about it, Farnsworth said. Abigail doesn't do that, tell you how she feels while she's still deciding. She holds it until she knows what it is. He paused. But she told me what you said. She wouldn't have done that if it hadn't mattered. Nathaniel looked at the old man. She is the best physician I have worked beside in 50 years, Farnsworth said. In case that information is relevant to you. It is, Nathaniel said. Very much. Farnsworth nodded once. Good, he said, and walked away. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the room alone in the particular stillness of a man who has done the large, difficult thing and is now in the space that comes after. Not resolution, not yet. But the moment when a door has opened and the room on the other side is not yet fully known, but is no longer unreachable. He stayed until the last of the conversations were concluded and the last of the business was addressed. He helped his mother into her coat. He handed his own coat to no one and walked out into the October night and stood in the street for a moment with the cold air on his face. I was thinking about demonstration over time, about evidence that was better but not yet complete, about a woman who watched everything which he had finally understood was not a warning. It was an invitation. He started with the roof. Not because it was romantic, because it was practical, and because Abigail Carter had grown up in a house with a leaking roof and had never once complained about it in any of her letters, which meant she had lived with it for years and managed without asking anyone for help. And that specific detail had stayed with him in the way small truths stay with a person once they've learned to pay attention to them. He found out through Farnsworth, not by asking Farnsworth directly, because that would have been transparent in a way that felt wrong, but by writing to him about a separate medical matter, and including in the postscript a question about the house on Wren Street where Abigail had grown up and whether anyone had attended to the property since her father's death. Farnsworth's reply came back in 9 days. The house was still Abigail's, left to her outright in her father's will. It had a tenant, a schoolteacher named Marsh, who paid a modest rent and had apparently been mentioning the roof situation to anyone who would listen since the previous spring. Nathaniel wrote to a builder in Harrowfield named Cullen, whom he trusted. He gave him the address. He told him to do the work properly and to send the bill to Brooks' estate and to tell no one who had commissioned it. He was not doing it to be thanked. He was doing it because the roof was leaking and it was Abigail's house and the evidence she had asked for was built from exactly these kinds of things, specific, practical, done without announcement. That was October. In November, he sent Farnsworth a crate. It contained 12 specific medical texts that Abigail had mentioned across various letters as being difficult to source in Boston. 3 of them she had described as essential to a treatment approach she was developing for pulmonary cases, the kind of slow-building fever and cough presentation that Emily's illness had been. He had spent 2 weeks tracking them down through booksellers in Philadelphia and one in Baltimore who specialized in medical literature. He wrote a short note and put it inside the crate addressed to Farnsworth, not to Abigail. The note said, "These are for the dispensary's library. No response necessary." He got a response anyway. It came 10 days later in Abigail's handwriting, and it said, "The Hartley text alone was worth 2 years of searching. How did you find it in Baltimore?" No response necessary, but I'm curious. He wrote back and told her about the bookseller. She wrote back about the text. They were back in correspondence, which he had not engineered deliberately, or not entirely deliberately, but which he was not going to pretend he regretted. The letters were different now. They had always had a quality of care, both of them choosing their words with the specific attention of people who had been careless before in different ways and had decided to stop. But there was something easier in them now, less managed. She asked him things without preamble, and he answered them the same way. And he asked her things, and she answered with the directness that he had come to understand was not sharpness, but was simply how she was built, straight through, no detour. She told him about a patient who had recovered from something that shouldn't have been recoverable, and had come back to the dispensary 3 weeks later with a jar of preserved fruit and a level of gratitude that had left Farnsworth clearing his throat repeatedly. He told her about a conversation with his farm manager that had gone better than he'd expected, because he'd approached it differently, had listened first, which was not historically his instinct. She wrote back, "That's not a small thing." He wrote back, "No, it wasn't." He sat with those 2 sentences for a long time after he sent them. In December, Emily wrote to Abigail about the snow. This was not unusual. Emily had been writing to Abigail since the summer, with the cheerful consistency of a child who has identified someone she admires and has decided that regular correspondence is the appropriate response to admiration. But the December letter was different from the others, and Abigail, reading it at the table in the back room of the dispensary, felt it. Emily wrote about the first snowfall and the birds that stayed through the cold, and what she was learning about tracking them by sound when the light was poor. She wrote about her mother, and this was the part that made Abigail set the letter down. For a moment, wrote about how Margaret had come to sit with her in the garden 3 mornings in a row and had asked her about the bird journal. Not with the polite disinterest of an adult indulging a child, with actual questions. Questions that suggested she had been listening to previous answers and wanted to know what came next. "I think she's trying," Emily wrote. "I don't know what changed her. Nathaniel says some people just need enough time to see something clearly, and then once they see it, they can't unsee it. I think he was talking about himself, but I think it's also Mother." Abigail read that sentence twice. Then she folded the letter and held it in her hands for a moment, not thinking in words exactly, but in the slow gathering way that understanding moves when it's been building for a long time and is finally arriving. She put the letter with the others. She kept them in the same drawer where she kept her father's letters, which was not a coincidence, which was something she had done without deliberating about it and had not examined until just now. She sat with that for a while. Then she got up and went back to work because there was work to do, and she was someone who did the work, and that had not changed and would not change. And that was the thing she was surest of more than anything else. He came to Boston in January. He did not announce the visit in advance. He wrote to Farnsworth that he would be in the city on business and asked if he might call at the dispensary, and Farnsworth wrote back a single line, "Tuesday afternoon. Come at 3. He arrived at 3 on Tuesday. Abigail opened the door. She was in her working clothes. The plain dark dress, her hair pinned back with the efficient practicality of someone who has stopped thinking about their hair by 8 in the morning because there are more important things to think about. She had ink on her left hand from the compounding notes. She looked, he thought, entirely herself. He had not understood until very recently how rare that was, a person who looked entirely themselves in every context he had seen them in, and how valuable. "You said business," she said. "I do have business," he said. "I also wanted to see you." She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Farnsworth is with a patient. Come in and don't touch anything." He came in and did not touch anything. He sat in the chair, the same chair he had sat in 4 months ago, the night he had come for Emily. The dispensary was familiar now, in the way places become familiar when you have lived through something significant in them. Abigail went back to the counter and the compounding she had apparently been in the middle of. She worked with the focused efficiency he had watched enough times now to recognize as her natural register, not performative precision, but genuine absorption. The quality of a person doing something they know how to do and find satisfying in the doing. "The roof," she said without turning around. He went still. "On the house on Wren Street," she said. "Mr. Marsh mentioned it. He was very careful not to tell me who commissioned it, which is how I knew it wasn't him." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "I should have anticipated that Marsh would mention it." "You should have," she agreed. "He's a school teacher. They notice things, and then they discuss them." She kept working. "Why did you do it without telling me?" "Because I wasn't doing it to be thanked," he said. "I was doing it because the roof was leaking and it's your house." She was quiet. "I will tell you," he said, "every time. Going forward. If that's what you'd prefer. I just didn't want you to feel obligated to respond to it in any particular way." She turned around then. She looked at him with the expression that he had come to understand was her fullest attention. Not the surface attention she gave to things that required management, but the underneath kind. "The Hartley text," she said. 2 weeks to find it. Give or take. "The roof." "Yes." "You wrote to Emily about the bird migration patterns," she said. "She told me. She said you had started noticing them." He hadn't known she knew that. "She mentioned it." "She mentions everything," Abigail said. "She's 11 and she's thorough." A pause. "She also told me you had asked her what I was like when I was here, at Harrowfield. She said you asked her to describe what I was like when I didn't know anyone was watching." He was very still. "I didn't tell her to share that." "I know," Abigail said. "She shared it because she thought I should know." She looked at him steadily. "What did she say?" "She said you talked to the horses," he said. "When you came back from the garden in the evenings. She said you talked to them the way you talk to patients, like they had something worth saying back." Abigail was quiet. "She said you laughed at something in one of your books 3 nights in a row and never told anyone what it was," he said. "She found that very suspicious." Something moved across Abigail's face, the particular movement of someone who has been seen in a way they did not arrange to be seen and is deciding how to receive it. "She's too observant," Abigail said. "She gets it from somewhere," he said. Farnsworth came through from the back room. Then, the way Farnsworth always appeared at the exact moment that created the maximum amount of useful disruption. He looked at Nathaniel in the chair. He looked at Abigail at the counter. He reached for his coat. "I have a house call," he said. "Abby, the Henderson compound needs another hour. Brooks." He looked at him once more with the look that communicated everything without using any of it. "Stay as long as you're useful." He left. The door closed. The dispensary was quiet. Abigail turned back to the counter. She worked for a few minutes in silence. Nathaniel sat and did not fill the silence, which was itself a form of evidence, and both of them knew it. "I want to show you something," she said finally. She reached under the counter and brought out a journal. Not the compounding notebook, a different one. Smaller. Worn at the corners in the way of something used constantly. She set it on the counter without handing it to him. "What is it?" he said. "It's what I've been building," she said. "The dispensary Farnsworth and I have been talking for 3 months about what it becomes when he retires. His hands are worse, and he knows it. He's been looking for a transition." She opened this journal to a page dense with notes and small diagrams. "I have been developing a plan. A women's dispensary. Not exclusively, we would treat anyone who came, but specifically designed to serve women who don't have access to medical care because they can't afford it, or because the care available to them treats them as secondary concerns. She paused. Women like the ones who come to this counter every week. Women who have been sick for months before they stop and address it because they can't stop. Women who need someone to ask them how they are and actually wait for the answer. He stood and crossed to the counter and looked at the journal without touching it. The plan was detailed in the way her medical notes were detailed, not just the vision, but the mechanics, the sourcing of compounds, the staffing, the finances. The finances were careful and realistic. She had not built a fantasy. She had built a structure. "This is months of work," he said. 5 months, she said. "Since August." "Since you arrived in Boston?" "Yes." He looked at her. "You've been building this the entire time." "I told you," she said. "I came to Boston because there was work. This is the work." She met his eyes. "I'm telling you now because you asked for a chance to demonstrate something over time, and you have, and I think the evidence is becoming complete enough that I can show you what I'm building without worrying that you'll mistake it for something I need saving from." He was very still. "I don't need saving," she said. "From anything. I need a partner who understands the difference between support and control, who can look at this," she gestured at the journal, "and see something worth investing in because it matters, not because it attaches him to me." "It matters," he said immediately. "Abigail, it matters, and this is the most important work in this county. What you're describing, women who don't have access, women who need—" He stopped. He was doing the thing he had learned to catch himself doing, which was filling space with words instead of listening. He stopped. He looked at her. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Not from me specifically. Tell me what this needs to become, what you want it to be." She looked at him. "A building," she said. "The one on Cheswick Street is for sale. It's large enough for 2 examination rooms, and a dispensary, and a small waiting area. And it would need—" "I'll find out the price," he said. "Nathaniel." "Not as a gift," he said quickly. "As an investment. In writing. With terms. Your dispensary, your decisions, your name on the door." He held her gaze. "I have money that is sitting in accounts doing commerce. This is better commerce." She looked at him for a long moment. "You haven't even seen the building," she said. "No," he said. "But I've seen the journal." He paused. "And I've seen you work. That's sufficient evidence." The quiet that followed was different from the previous ones. It had a different density. The quality of something that has been building for a long time and has just found its level. "There's another thing," she said. "Yes." She looked down at the journal, then back up. "Farnsworth has asked me to stay in Boston when he retires. He wants to sign the dispensary over the existing one as part of the transition. His lease runs through 1817. After that, it would be mine." She paused. "Boston is where I intend to live." "Yes," he said. "Harrowfield is not. I have a manager who runs the estate competently," he said. "I have business in Philadelphia and Richmond that requires my presence perhaps 3 months of the year. The rest of the time, I am where I choose to be." He looked at her. "I am telling you that Boston is where I would choose to be." She was very still. "That is not a small thing you're saying," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." "You've thought about this." "For several months," he said. "Before I showed you the journal. Long before you showed me the journal." She looked at him with the full weight of her attention, the kind that went underneath and looked at the structure of a thing rather than its surface. He let her look. He had nothing to hide. That was new, and it was real, and he knew she could tell the difference. "There's a condition," she said. "Name it. If we do this." She said it carefully, with the precision of someone who is committing to a specific thing and intends for the commitment to be exact. "If we build something, it is built on what is true, not what is convenient or expected or manageable. If something is wrong, we say so. If something needs to change, we say so." She held his gaze. "I spent 4 months in an engagement where the truth was managed around me rather than shared with me. I will not do that again. Not for anyone." "No," he said. "You won't. I won't let that happen." He paused. I won't be that man again. I can't guarantee I'll never make mistakes. I will. I am making some form of mistake with some regularity, I expect. But I will not be the man who holds the truth away from you because it's inconvenient. He met her eyes. That is a promise I can make and keep. She looked at him. She picked up the journal and closed it and held it in both hands, the same way she held things she was deciding about carefully, fully, with the attention of someone who understood that decisions made with both hands were better than decisions made with one. All right, she said. He did not immediately say anything. He let it be what it was. All right, he said. She came to Harrowfield in March. Not alone, she came with Farnsworth, who had decided that a trip south was good for his joints, and who managed this decision with the casual authority of a man who does what he likes and has been doing so for 70 years. Emily had written to Abigail specifically requesting a March visit on the grounds that the early migrants would be arriving, and she wanted someone who would take the bird journal seriously. Abigail took it very seriously. They spent 2 mornings in the garden with the journal open, and Emily narrating, and Abigail making notes in the margin in her precise hand, and asking questions that made Emily's face light up in the specific way it lit when an adult treated her knowledge as worth receiving. Nathaniel watched from the window the first morning, and from the garden itself the second morning, close enough to hear, but far enough not to interrupt, because he had learned what it meant to be present without crowding, which was a skill he had underestimated before he needed it. On the second afternoon, Margaret came out. She had her own shawl and a cup of tea, and she came without announcing herself, which meant she had thought about it beforehand and decided on the element of ordinary. No ceremony, no managed entrance. Just a woman coming out into her own garden to sit beside the people in it. She sat beside Abigail on the low wall. She looked at the bird journal. She asked Emily what species had been confirmed so far that spring. Abigail watched this exchange from the side of her eye, the careful, unannounced watching that was her nature, and saw something she had not been certain she would see. Margaret was not performing interest. She was genuinely there in the conversation, following it with the specific tracking of a woman who is paying attention because something matters to her, not because she has decided it should appear to matter. You've raised her very well, Abigail said quietly, during a moment when Emily had gone to retrieve a second pencil from the house. Margaret looked at her. She raised herself largely, she said. I provided the structure. She did the rest. That is also raising someone well, Abigail said. A pause. I have been thinking, Margaret said, about something you said to me in September, when you arrived to care for Emily. Yes, you said you were not there to create difficulty. Margaret turned the teacup in her hands. I have thought about that often. Because I wanted you to know that I understand now that I was the one who created difficulty. Not you. You were simply the person who bore the consequence of it. She paused. I am not asking you to. I know, Abigail said. You don't need to ask me for anything, Mrs. Brooks. Margaret looked at her. Margaret, Abigail said. Not warmly, she was not someone who moved to warmth quickly, and neither was Margaret, which was perhaps part of why this was working. If you'd prefer. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. I would prefer that. Emily came back with the pencil, and the moment became the ordinary moment it looked like from the outside, and both women let it. The conversation happened on the third morning. Nathaniel found Abigail in the back garden before breakfast. She was there because she rose early and always had, and she was reading one of the Hartley texts with the focused absorption of someone who had been waiting for a quiet hour to get back to it. She looked up when she heard him. She did not look surprised. I want to ask you something, he said. She closed the book on her finger. Ask it. He sat down beside her on the wall. He had thought about how to say this for a long time, and had eventually concluded that there was no arrangement of words that was both precisely right and also not terrifying to say. So he was going to say it plainly and accept the consequences. I want to marry you, he said. Not because it is sensible or expected, or because it resolves anything conveniently. Because I want to be your partner in the specific meaning of that word, the one you defined for me in October. Because I want to be the person in your life who knows what you're working on and cares about it, and is there when it's difficult, and learns what he doesn't know, and says what is true. He looked at her. Because you are the most interesting and capable and honest person I have ever been in a room with. And every room I am in without you is missing something I cannot replace with anything else. She looked at him. She did not look away. There are conditions, she said. Yes, he said. Name them. The dispensary is mine, she said. The building on Cheswick Street when we secure it mine. The decisions, the staffing, the cases I take mine. You may offer opinions. You may not override them. Yes. Boston is our home, she said. Harrowfield is where your business is managed. I will come when it matters to you, and I ask you to come to Boston when it matters to me, and we negotiate the rest as it arises. Yes. Emily visits as often as she wants, she said. She has the Bird Journal, and she is going to need someone to teach her what she can't learn from books, and I intend to be available for that. She will be delighted, he said. That is an understatement. And she stopped. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him, and there was something in her face that he had not seen before, not quite vulnerability, but the specific openness of a person who is about to say something true that cost them something to arrive at. I loved my father's work, she said. I love this work. I have never loved anything the way I love the work. I need you to understand that that will never be second. It cannot be. It will never be second, he said. Abigail, it is one of the reasons, it is one of the things that made me understand what I felt. Watching you work. Watching you be completely and unreservedly what you are in the middle of doing something that matters. He paused. I do not want to diminish that. I want to be close enough to it to learn from it. That is all. She looked at him for a long time. The morning was still around them. Somewhere behind the wall, a bird was calling. Emily would know which one. Yes, she said. He was very still. Yes, she said again, and this time it was not confirmation, it was simply the word as itself, clean and whole. He took one breath. He reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the wall between them. Not the sapphire. He had not brought the sapphire ring because it was not his to offer again, and she was not someone who would want it back. This was a different ring. A simple thing. A thin gold band with no stone, which he had had made in Boston by a jeweler on State Street, who had asked him what it was for, and he had said, a promise I intend to keep, and the jeweler had looked at him and said, those are the ones worth making. She looked at it. She picked it up. She turned it in her fingers, examining it with the attention she brought to everything, looking at the craft of it, the specific quality of the workmanship, what it was made of, and how. Then she slid it onto her finger. She looked at it there. Good fit, she said. I asked Farnsworth your size, he said. She looked at him. You asked Farnsworth my ring size. Weeks ago. He said nothing. I told him not to, he said. He's better at keeping confidences than you'd expect for a man who talks as much as he does. Something that was entirely a smile moved across her face, quick and real and unguarded, the smile of a person who has forgotten to manage their expression and does not mind. You told him weeks ago, she said. Yes. Before I'd said yes. Yes. That was confident. That was hopeful, he said. There's a difference. She looked at the ring on her hand. She looked at him. There is, she said. You're right about that. The wedding was held at the end of April at the dispensary on Merchant Street. Abigail had not wanted a large ceremony. She had been precise about it in the way she was precise about everything. She wanted the people who had been true to her in this chapter of her life, in the space where that life had actually been built, and she did not want anything else. Farnsworth stood with her, which was the position he had apparently been occupying in his own mind since January, and which he accepted with a dignity that was only slightly undermined by the fact that his eyes were wet before the ceremony had properly begun and stayed that way throughout. Emily sat in the front in a new dress she had chosen herself in a shade of green she had selected because it was the color of the first leaves, and she had decided the occasion warranted something living. She held the Bird Journal on her lap, which was perhaps not traditional, but was entirely Emily. Margaret sat beside her daughter. She had come to Boston for the wedding, which had required Nathaniel to say nothing and his mother to decide it herself, which was the only way it could have happened. She had traveled without complaint and arrived without ceremony, and had walked into the dispensary and looked around at the neat shelves and the two handwritings on the labels and the general evidence of a working life built with intention, and she had said nothing, which was its own form of saying everything. She sat beside Emily and held herself with the composed uprightness that was simply how she was built, but her hands in her lap were not quite still. A small thing, that motion almost invisible. Nathaniel saw it. He thought Abigail probably saw it too. The words they exchanged were simple. Abigail had written hers, and she said them plainly, looking at him directly. The way she said every true thing without decoration, without management, in the specific clear voice of a woman who had decided that honesty was the only currency worth spending. He said his looking at her, the way he had finally learned to look at her. Not past her, not through her, not at the version of her that was useful to his existing understanding of things. At her. Actual her. The woman with ink on her left hand and a bird journal in her family, and a plan in a worn journal, and a capacity for steadiness under pressure that had changed him irrevocably. He put the ring on her finger, the same ring already there. He simply held her hand for a moment and looked at it, which she understood, because she understood most things about him now. She held his hand back. The room was small and warm, and full of the people who had been true. The next morning, the dispensary opened at its regular hour. The postal boy arrived first, as he always did, leaving a stack of correspondence on the counter. Farnsworth sorted it with his steady hand. Abigail was already in the back room where the Henderson compound from yesterday still needed finishing, which she had told herself she would complete this morning before anything else, and intended to. Nathaniel made the tea. He had learned how she took it, not because she had told him, but because he had watched her make it for herself enough times to know which was itself a form of paying attention. He brought it through to the back room and set it on the table beside her notebook without saying anything. She glanced at it, glanced at him. "Thank you," she said. "Of course," he said. I went back to the front room. He had letters of his own to attend to, and he had established the habit of doing his correspondence at the small table by the window, which Farnsworth had vacated without being asked, with the tact of a man who understood that some space required redistribution. The first patient arrived at 8. Abigail came through from the back room and greeted her and took her through, and Nathaniel heard the low, careful register of her voice, asking questions and waiting for the answers. And he looked at his letters and thought that this, the ordinary working morning, the sound of someone doing the thing they were built to do, the tea cooling on the table in the back room, the particular quality of a day that has just begun and intends to be useful. This was the specific shape of what he had wanted without knowing he wanted it. Not rescue, not grand occasion, not the performance of having arrived at something, just the work, just the morning, just the door open and the day beginning, and the truest version of both of them in the same room, doing what they did together without either of them having to be less than what they were to make room for the other. He went back to his letters. In the back room, Abigail's tea was still warm, and the dispensary on Merchant Street opened its doors to the morning of April 30th, 1815, exactly as it had every morning since an autumn day the year before, when a woman with a leather satchel and a letter from an old physician had walked in from the road and decided this was where her life was going to be built. The door was open, the work was good, and she was at last, and entirely, and on every term she had ever required, exactly where she had chosen to be.